welcome to the channel. I'm Lexicon, and today, I have a microphone. That's right, no more audio from the depths of the deepest trenches. No more screeches of a banshee overlaying my gorgeous, suave voice. No longer do I sound as if a cat has taken its claws to my vocal cords. Let's talk about farm sims. But before that, the bigger genre they come from, cozy games. So, cozy games have kind of become big lately, huh? I've certainly seen a huge boost in their numbers these last few years. This has all come to a shock to me since I've been neck deep in cozy games since I learned to wield a console as a young, tender child with a malleable brain thirsty for that sweet, sweet dopamine. I picked up Animal Crossing City Folk since I was too much of a tiny baby to have grown up with a GameCube. Yes, feel free to say how old you feel now. The Wii was our first big console. But anyway, I was instantly hooked. After all, what more could you want? You have animals who are mean to you, refrigerators that fit in your pockets, debt, and a fuzzy little loan shark who forces you to keep upgrading a house that you never asked for. Also fishing and fruit and fossils. Oh, and if you're really lucky, you might even have enough money left over from all your crushing debt to buy yourself a new change of clothes from the ridiculously overpriced store owned by a gay giraffe. I played City Folk until the music had burned tracks into the surface of my brain from how often I'd listened to it. I watched the YouTube, I read the blogs, I saw the screenshots and the fan art. It was one of the first video games that I truly, really fell in love with. Not for the brilliant story, or the graphics, or anything else gamers rave about, but for the chill charm and personality it held. Animal Crossing was one of the first games beyond Minecraft that I ever played as a kid that opened my mind to the possibility of an open-ended game. That being said, they were nearly all I played as a kid, besides Pet Resort on the Nintendo DS. So I think they were probably the seed for all my game preferences more than anything. So one day, I'm recommended to try something called Harvest Moon. I was told it's like Animal Crossing in a lot of ways, but also different, which was 100% enough to get my little kid brain invested. I went straight to the internet to look for this magical thing called Harvest Moon. I had a 3DS at this point, I believe. You know, the old models that came in red and blue. I had a blue one with a really sucky camera. Anyway, so I'm looking up what Harvest Moon games you could play on a 3DS, and I come across Tale of Two Towns. As I did with every game I desperately wanted and could never have, I found a YouTube series on it to binge and live vicariously through. This was like magic. It had all the vibes and chillness of Animal Crossing, but in this game, you were a farmer. You had a tight schedule and goals to fill. You could raise crops and animals and get married to anime characters. Needless to say, I finally broke my parents and got them to get it for me. This game was all I wanted as a child. I think I must have played it to the 10th endgame year, and that was only on one file. I loved everything about it. I saw every event and made every recipe. I got psyched about having a giant pickling jar that I could make pickled plums in, and I actually replayed the game so I could do the main story arc twice. I had no idea who to pick as a marriage candidate, so I picked a guy at random and convinced myself we had so much in common. He was a horse dude with a ponytail. But hey, the family events were cute. Anyway, I played that game into the ground until it would barely play anymore. When I realized that there were more of these farming simulators, I was stoked. I got a new beginning and went from there. I kept playing when Harvest Moon was sent over to Xseed and made into Story of Seasons. I played Rune Factory 4 into the ground just like Tale of Two Towns. I played Stardew Valley and Rune Factory 5, and now it's come full circle back to Animal Crossing New Horizons with what I called the farming update. Basically, this little hobby of mine has turned into quite the passion for social farming simulators. From fanservice anime dragons to anti-capitalist baby apples, I'm here for it all. But where did all of these games come from? And why did they enter the mainstream so suddenly? I think a lot of it can be attributed to quarantine, which of course is not news to the Animal Crossing community. New Horizons really blew up when it released just on time for everyone stuck at home to delve into the world of cozy town-building video games. Those of us who might never have considered ourselves as someone who likes video games in the first place found that these titles were something we could all enjoy, let epic gamer or not. Another potential factor was the release of Stardew Valley in 2016. This indie title took over the Western world by storm when it came out, and for a good many people, it was their first experience with the genre. While farm sims outside of this exact genre have existed for a while, I'm specifically talking about the social farm sim, wherein part of your focus is the town, its people, and a general sense of story. Stardew Valley blew up in places where games like Story of Seasons were much less popular, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a gateway drug into the more classic-styled titles or the development of new ones. Games like My Time at Portia, Coral Island, Littlewood, and many others all seem to take inspiration from the wide success of Stardew Valley and the series that it, in turn, took inspiration from. It's truly spawned a new generation of cozy social sims, and I'm glad to see it too. There's just something special about chill music, cute character portraits, and getting in a platonic partnership with a sewer demon. Or, if fighting and leveling up are something you need to spice up your gameplay, they have that too in the form of Stardew's dungeons, or, even better, the sprawling stories and combat systems of Rune Factory. I think a lot of the strength of these social farming sims comes from their storytelling potential. While you might not have a super tight narrative like you would in, say, a Telltale game, you do have a sense of community. That's not something a lot of games give you, even in self-insert RPGs. Undertale comes close, but you never quite feel like part of the towns you visit, just a traveler. In cozy games, you carve out your mark on the land and build your character's own life, and that makes it something special. That's not to say that the genre is perfect, though. I've touched on this topic before, but I feel like it warrants a little more commentary. Where one game excels in a certain area, it tends to decline in another, and that goes for all the games I've tried. My favorite is without a doubt Rune Factory 4, as it balances complexity of farming, town events, story, character writing, and more. It's the only one I think fills all these categories, and though I know the game has its flaws, so does everything else in the world. Rune Factory 4 is the standard to which I hold all other social farming sims, and that includes the series it spawned from, Harvest Moon, or as it's now known, Story of Seasons. Story of Seasons and the preceding Harvest Moon titles all generally do a very good job at atmosphere and writing. The characters each have involved events for every new level of intimacy you reach, and they all seem to give new insights to the characters. The story is always simple and to the point, but effective at what it sets out to do. Help you rebuild or restore some part of the town, or the entire thing, and truly become part of the community. Where I would say these games lag behind a little bit is the complexity of farming. Harvest Moon games are pretty simple and repetitive in their farming, and even those which have gameplay mechanics to make those chores go by faster still don't do it to the extent of, say, Stardew Valley or Rune Factory. They also just don't have that many options for farming, with each facet of the experience being quite streamlined and simplified. Now, it has to be simplified to some degree, but especially in the older games, there wasn't that much detail to put into it or different ways to farm. With the newer Story of Seasons games, there have been a lot more in-depth approaches to how you care for your crops and what you can do with your produce once it's finished, but it still doesn't seem to reach that same sweet spot Stardew Valley does. Stardew Valley takes the cake when it comes to sheer dopamine production on farming alone. The focus of the game seems to be farming in its entirety, broken only by the mines and other dungeons you can crawl into. Stardew has its charms when it comes to town gameplay and the social aspect of its world, but it's still almost criminally underdeveloped in my opinion. The characters are very one-note, and even when they have events or even when they're involved in the story, they just don't tend to offer much. They have the building blocks of a story, and people who defend the character writing of Stardew Valley often cite that. The individual characters touch on deeper and more nuanced topics than you would usually find in a social sim, but my problem is that they don't go anywhere with it. The actual dialogue content is pretty dry and minimal, is what I'm trying to say. Sure, Shane might struggle with depression and alcoholism, but it's not explored beyond a few events where the information is presented to you. And that's the best example out of the Valley. The arcs are simply presented, like you're reading a picture book. I didn't feel very involved going through any of the storylines except for the main one, which is the only real sequence of events that I feel has any storytelling weight to it. This is one of those things where I feel like the fandom has really taken off with developing the characters until they have this big idea of who these people are in the general fandom consensus. Sort of like how the Danny Phantom fandom operates. Its strength lies in the variety of day-to-day gameplay, quality of life upgrades available, and a tight gameplay loop that never really leaves you without something to do. It does not lie in its storytelling ability or strength of character. I still love Stardew, and have way too many hours put into it, but all of those hours were spent grinding money or doing the Ginger Island challenges or completing the mines, not socializing or attending festivals. Once you go to a festival, that's kind of it. Not much else can happen. There are no alternate ways that a festival can go, the dialogue is bland and uninspired, and there's no incentive to go back the next year, once you've seen the event and gotten what you need from Pierre's vendor booth. In series like Rune Factory or Story of Seasons, festivals are much more interactive, and characters often group together where they can have randomly selected group conversations that make the festival itself feel more alive. Plus, in that setup, the festival is actually a big event with a small period for talking to everyone after the fact. Whereas in Stardew, the entire event tends to be one long talking period, with just a few interactive events. Sometimes, like in the case of the Moonlight Jellies Festival, it's not interactive at all in any way. They come off as shallow and one note, much like the characters attending them. Once again, I think Rune Factory comes out king in festivals. And if you've got no idea why, you haven't played Rune Factory. They're all varied, there are tons, and all of them are different and heavily interactive the whole way through. That being said, a ton of people really enjoy the storytelling and social aspects of Stardew, so maybe it's got something I'm missing. Or it's just not for me. Or maybe it doesn't fit the vibe of the game in some way I'm not grasping. Either way, that's my opinion on the matter, and I'd be happy to hear from someone who disagrees. What's your stance on the matter? Do you think I'm right or wrong? No matter what your preference is at the end of the day, social farm sims all have something to offer. Video games have proven themselves capable of being something outside of a first-person shooter or a fast-paced, grindy RPG. And the future of creative direction in gaming is exciting to say the least. By the way, before I end the video, here in the background I've drawn my Stardew Valley character beside a more stereotypical Harvest Moon style farmer. I think they illustrate how different and yet similar these kinds of games can be. Do you have any favorite picks of the genre, or maybe something to add to the conversation? Please do tell me in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you had fun here today, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. A second of your time helps more than you know, and I'm grateful for every one. With that said, I'm Lexicon, and I'll see you next time.